Right. Okay, so this is Scotland at 7 on the 5th of September. Thanks for joining me. I'm Hugh Stewart. I'm sorry for the slightly delayed start. I'm just going to go over, first of all, our latest from Ukraine's defence from its attack on Russia, on day 194 today. Ukraine has made progress in its recently launched counter-offensive, with its forces taking two settlements in the south, a third in the east, as well as additional territory in the east of the country. President Volodymyr Zelensky said this during his Sunday evening address. Russian authorities said the situation around the Russian-occupied Zaporizhia nuclear plant in southern Ukraine was calm on Sunday, after UN inspectors said on Saturday that it had again lost external power. Analysts are expecting gas prices to surge to record highs this week after Russia shut down a key pipeline to Europe. President Zelensky warned Europe to expect a difficult winter after Russia shut down the main pipeline that supplies Russian gas to the continent. Russia is preparing a decisive energy blow on all Europeans for this winter, he said. A Russian journalist, Ivan Safronov, is facing a 24-year jail term for treason on charges which have been prosecuted with secret evidence and behind closed doors. The Russian state should be tried for historic crimes committed by the Soviet Union, Ukrainian director Sergei Loznitsa said before the premiere of his new documentary, The Kyiv Trial, which is showing at the Venice Film Festival. Sweden has said it's on high alert for outside intervention in its upcoming election amid increased tensions with Russia. Ukraine's Prime Minister has thanked Germany for its solidarity in the face of the Russian invasion while calling for more weapons, in a sign of easing tensions between Berlin and Kyiv. Denis Schimel, who was welcomed by the German Chancellor Olaf Scholz with military honours in Berlin on Sunday, is the most senior Ukrainian official to visit the German capital in months. Scholz said on Sunday his government has been planning for a total halt in gas deliveries in December, promising measures to lower prices and to tie social benefits to inflation. Russia is no longer a reliable energy partner, Herr Scholz told a news conference in Berlin. That's the latest today on Russia's attack on Ukraine, day 194. So let me welcome our guest tonight. Joining us from South Lanarkshire is Linda Fabiani. Linda was a member of the Scottish Parliament up until last May and also Deputy Speaker, Deputy Presiding Officer. Thanks for joining me tonight, Linda. How are you?
I'm grand, thank you very much.
Well,
I'm
let's
glad
go
we've got the
straight in.
gremlins sorted out.
Top story today. Well, at the moment, right now, Boris Johnson is Prime Minister, but he won't be in a couple of hours because the top story, of course, is that the Conservative Party has chosen a new leader. Liz Truss will become the UK's next Prime Minister after beating Rishi Sunak in a bitterly fought Conservative leadership contest. The Foreign Secretary, who won 81,326 votes, that's about 57% of Tory members, to the former Chancellor's 60,399, that's about 43%, and she will take over from Boris Johnson, who was ousted by his own MPs earlier this summer. But the euphoria of victory quickly gave way to the hard reality of the economic challenges ahead, with the country gripped by a cost of living crisis, leaving families struggling to pay their energy bills this winter. Truss has said she will reveal plans to support households within a week of taking office, with allies understood to be discussing a £100 billion package, which could include freezing energy bills. She has already pledged to reverse the national insurance rise, although it disproportionately benefits the well-off. The UK's fourth Tory Prime Minister in 6 years declared, we will deliver, and we will deliver on the many challenges facing her government, including the state of the National Health Service. Truss also Truss also praised the outgoing Prime Minister, saying that he was admired from Kyiv to Carlisle, perhaps unaware that the Tories actually lost Carlisle to Labour last May. Responding to the Tory leader's election, Ian Blackford MP says it was unforgivable that the Tory government had wasted the summer sitting on its hands and urged there is no time to waste in freezing energy bills and delivering support that households and businesses need. SNP's Westminster leader, Mr Blackford, said the tone of the Tory leadership campaign suggested Liz Truss is shaping up to be even worse than Boris Johnson, with another shift to the right under Westminster control. Pete Wishart MP said, the fact Liz Truss failed to win the support of 50% of eligible Conservative Party members just so shows how absurd and undemocratic Tory proposals are to rig the rules of the independence referendum. And it leaves the Tory government with egg all over its face. So we'll maybe come back to that point in a minute, because that's interesting that Liz Truss didn't actually win 50% of all Tory members, though she won about 57% of those who voted. But let's look at the big issues, of course. Liz Truss said, we will deliver 3 times. I wonder which 3 topics she was thinking of putting to the top of her tray. What would you say is the first thing the new Prime Minister has to deal with, Linda?
Well, it's obviously the cost of living, and that encompasses so many different things. The energy crisis just being one of them. And it is a crisis. It's a crisis for people who are living day by day, worrying about bills coming in, worrying about how to heat their home, worrying about inflation generally, coming recession, and how they're going to cope. So that's got to be top of our agenda. Now, I listened to her speech today, and it was full of forced sound bites, and it was interesting at points. I noticed that there must have been somebody down the front holding up a big plaque every now and often that says clap now, because there was certainly pauses in her speech and before the adulation started. Now, I don't believe that everyone that ends up in public office has to be a wonderful orator. You know, too many people are wonderful orators with nothing to back it up. My problem with Liz Truss is that I don't feel she's either a good orator or has anything to back it up. I think it's frying pan and fire stuff here, and I'm not convinced that she is going to make a difference in quick time at all. So we have to wait and see. She becomes Prime Minister tomorrow after a Prime Minister elected by a very small portion of the population goes up to an unelected head of state in Balmoral to be sworn in to run this country. So we shall see what she comes up with first. She's made a lot of promises. We'll see if she's able to deliver on any of them.
But as the Tory leadership campaign dragged on through the summer, it was only really late in the day that Liz Truss even started talking about the energy crisis. At the beginning, it was tax cuts, wasn't it? If you asked her for her priorities 2 months ago, it would have been tax cuts, and tax cuts. But it looks now, this leak from the papers today is suggesting that there's maybe going to be 100 billion put in to cap the energy. So does that mean that Liz Truss is going to have to abandon her drift to the right, as Ian Blackford, or was it Pete Wishart said, this is a drift to the right? Definitely, but is she going to have to park that for now to deal with the energy crisis, or are we going to see civil unrest?
Well, she'd spent the leadership contest, as both of them did, pandering to the membership. And when you look at the actual result, there's not a big margin there. I actually thought she would win by a higher margin. And when you look back, the 57% is below what previous leadership contests have brought in on behalf of who is going to be the leader of the Conservative Party. So, I mean, I don't know the woman. I wouldn't pretend to know the woman. I can only talk about impressions that I've picked up. I think her first priority will still be staying on top. And if that means pandering to those that she believes will keep her on top, I think she'll do that. As far as moving away from the right and becoming a bit lefty to deal with the energy crisis, that all depends on how she and whoever she ends up with in her cabinet choose to deal with it. When you look at what a lot of other countries have done, there's various things that could be looked at. My concern is that she will still try to stay on the side of big business, and that she will still try to invoke tax cuts of some kind for those that would benefit most, which are those who are likely to support her and her party. Because even from what she said today, she is looking to win at the next general election. So she'll be very careful about how she looks after up to that. So I hope there's more than just a couple of announcements. I hope there is a really well-founded and carefully planned emergency budget, because of course everything she does will have a direct effect on the funding that the Scottish Government has as well. So there's an awful lot in there that is concerning, and how she agrees to implement any solutions, in inverted commas, that she comes up with will have counter effects in many other aspects. So watch the space, I guess.
Well, of course, it's maybe unfair to predict the outcome of a premiership when it hasn't even started yet. So Boris Johnson lasted just over 3 years. I must admit that's 2 years longer than I thought he was going to run. But you
That's
never know
true.
what somebody's going to make of that job once they get it. But you're not inspired so far, anyway. But people have to
No.
respond pragmatically to what's happening. But one of the interesting things about the campaign between Sunak and Truss is that Sunak started off. He spent a lot of money on his campaign video. He was out of the starting line first. Her opening presentation was quite shambolic, and several days later,
Mm-hmm.
and so he actually won the support of most of the Conservative MPs. But somehow or other, she came from the back and won the ordinary Conservative members. Now, there are rumours that a lot of Conservative MPs are really not at all happy that they've got stuck with a
Mm-hmm.
candidate who they obviously didn't think was up to it. So does that mean she's
Mm-hmm.
on a sugly peg right from the start?
Well, I think she is in a bit of a sugary peg, you know. Yeah, I think you said yourself that the number of Tory leaders there's been since they took power in 2010, it's not exactly a stable party. And I'm really interested in the Scottish Tories at the moment. When you look at our own Parliament in Holyrood, we've got Oliver Mundell, who has resigned from the front bench. And I haven't seen the detail of this myself, Hugh, but somebody told me that Dean Lockhart has resigned from the Parliament. So there's obviously unrest there. I mean, maybe it's just a good day for them to bury bad news. Who knows what the heck's going on? Douglas Ross has been missing in action for long enough. So what the heck's going on with the Tories in the Scottish Parliament, I have no idea. Again, I'm sure there's more will come out about that. So it's clearly not a happy party. I don't think I know any of the Tories in Westminster really, apart from the likes of David Mundell, who's been about for a while. Who knows what he'll get up to? Um, but no, I don't think they're a happy bunch. I think the fact that the electorate have gone for someone other than which the parliamentary party did is a problem right from the start. They're all
Hmm.
falling over themselves today to talk about party unity and the one big family. Well, they haven't behaved like that for a long time. The other interesting thing I'm seeing is that all of a sudden there's this move to make Boris a hero. Oh my goodness. The very idea, the man was a complete incompetent as far as running the country is concerned. Um, Unfortunately, I don't think Liz Truss is the one to save them.
Well, let's see
And
how
when I
long
say
this Truss
unfortunately, I don't
years
mean on
last.
behalf of the Tories, I mean on behalf of the UK generally and Scotland in particular.
Yep. Okay. So she takes over tomorrow, and we'll see what she does with the massive problems which are facing her. Just before we move
Mm.
on, Pete Wishart, of course, came back to the report which the Sunday Times produced yesterday, saying that the Conservatives at UK level may themselves put forward a Scottish independence referendum, but move the goalposts, including having the requirement that at least 50% of the
Yep.
electorate, not just those who actually vote, but including those who didn't vote, at least
Mm.
51% of them should get in. So that means two things. As I read today, that means they'll have to rerun the Brexit referendum, because I think that went through with less than 40% of the vote.
Aye.
And of course, it also means that if that rule applied to the Tory election, Liz Truss would not be elected today because she'd failed to
Mm.
reach 50%. Is Pete
Yeah.
just having a dig there, or is that a serious point? Do you think the Tories
Oh,
are actually going to do that,
I
this moving the goalposts?
think it's a very, very serious point. I mean, I would put nothing past them. They're a bunch of dirty rats as far as I'm concerned, you know. And I mean, the thing is, we can talk about the Brexit referendum and how, with that rule in place, it wouldn't have happened. We can talk about the leadership election and everything else. That wouldn't matter to them. The rules don't apply to them as far as they're concerned. And, it's not just a Tory thing, it's a unionist thing, it's a Westminster unionist thing. Back in 1979, The Labour Party gerrymandered the 1979 referendum. They are perfectly capable of it, with no thought other than we want our own way in this. We don't want Scotland to be independent because we need Scotland. And they can moan all they like about this being the only election stroke referendum that this is ever going to happen in. We're not doing it when it comes to contests for us. It's only for them that we're doing it. Let's batter the Scots yet again. And it's absolutely outrageous and totally opposed to any form of democracy.
Well, we'll see if anything more comes of that proposal. So I'm going to move on now because, Linda, you mentioned, of course, that there will have to be an emergency budget. Presumably Liz Truss and whoever's Chancellor will outline one in the next couple of weeks. Now, the Scottish Parliament meets again tomorrow, and the outcome of the Scottish Government's own emergency budget review will be set out to Parliament within 2 weeks of any UK government emergency budget. This was John Swinney, the Deputy First Minister, speaking today. Mr Swinney will update the Scottish Parliament on Wednesday, that's September the 7th, and that's a day after the First Minister unveils the 2022 to 23 programme for government on how the Scottish Government will meet the cost of rising pressure on, the costs of the rising pressure on public sector pay. The Scottish Government committed last month to undertake an emergency budget review in order to assess any and all opportunities to redirect resources to those most in need, to reduce the burdens on business and to stimulate the Scottish economy. This is part of a raft of measures to mitigate the growing cost emergency which is affecting people and businesses. The Deputy First Minister said, "This year's programme for government is set against a backdrop of economic upheaval which has not been seen for a generation, already impacting people, businesses, public services and the third sector across Scotland. For that reason, this is a different programme for government, one that's subject to the outcome of our emergency budget review and its implications for our budget for 2023 to 24. The UK government's existing spending plans, coupled with the Bank of England inflation forecasts, mean that the Scottish government's funding will fall by 4.5% in real terms next year. If inflation rises significantly higher, the resources available to us will erode even further at the very time when costs are increasing. The Scottish Government is continuing to do everything in our powers and resources to help those most affected. However, the powers and resources needed to tackle this emergency on a scale required lie squarely with the UK Government. Further spending cuts to Scotland's budget from the UK Government would be disastrous and would cost lives." So John Swinney and the Scottish Government are they giving a warning shot to Liz Truss straight away as she takes office, saying, "You are effectively cutting our budget if you don't match inflation." Do you think Liz Truss will have to start taking the Scottish Government's position seriously?
Well, the Tories have never taken the Scottish Government seriously. So I don't expect Liz Truss to start that now. They've always treated Scotland with contempt. The Scottish Government's between a rock and a hard place, Hugh. They've got the programme for government that the First Minister has to announce in some detail tomorrow. I know they've been having emergency meetings because that's been publicised about budgets, etc. But the reality is that until there is a UK government emergency budget, the Scottish Government don't know what funding they're going to have. And that's the rock. And the hard place is an opposition in the Scottish Parliament that are more concerned with doing down the SNP government than they are with doing what's best for Scotland. So, Nicola Sturgeon can't come out for the programme for government and make loads of promises. I think she'll probably say a few things. I suspect, for example, the Scottish Child Payment may well be something, because I know that there's been a lot of discussion about that. Again, that's been widely publicised. But she can't come out with a whole raft of promises. And she'll be slammed for that by the opposition. But if she was to come out with her after promises and then come back within 2 weeks of the UK government's emergency budget and say, we can't do this anymore because they have slashed our funding, she'd get hammered for that as well, rather than supported. So it's a very, very difficult position they're in. So all they can do is do their best. I think they did very, very well, about the public sector pay awards. And we'll hear, I understand, more about that from John Swinney, the Deputy First Minister, on Wednesday. But these things all cost. Now, public sector were due a decent increase, of course they were. But there are effects on other areas of a fixed expenditure that the Scottish Government has to meet. So anything that they commit in addition has a detrimental effect elsewhere. So in trying to mitigate the worst things that Westminster are doing to people has an effect on other Scottish Government policies. So it's very, very difficult for them. The responsibility is Westminster's, and I actually really feel for those in Scotland that are trying to make decisions quite isolated, because they have neither the opposition to back them up, nor indeed the mainstream press and media to back them up either. It's always bad SNP, bad Scottish Government. So they'll do their best, I mean, absolutely no doubt of that. Nicola Sturgeon and John Swinney will do their absolute best for people. But I just wish it could be better recognised, the strictures that they are under in so doing.
Okay, so John Swinney is in charge of the Scottish Government finances temporarily, of course, while the Finance Minister is on maternity leave. So we look forward to Holyrood meeting again tomorrow. And first of all, we have the programme for government outlined by the First Minister, and then some forward thinking about the budget by John Swinney on Wednesday. But of course, as you say, Linda, they're waiting for the new UK Chancellor to outline if he or she is going to call it an emergency budget. So we won't know that yet for some time. Let's move on to another story about the UK economy, another one of those issues that Liz Truss is going to start delivering on tomorrow. So Liz Truss becomes UK's next Prime Minister with the economy on the brink of recession, according to figures that show that private sector activity fell last month while businesses struggle with soaring costs. The latest snapshot from Standards & Poor's Global and the Chartered Institute of Procurement and Supply, that's the CIPS, has revealed a severe and accelerated decline in manufacturing output in August, alongside weaker activity in the UK's dominant services sector. The monthly business survey, which is closely watched by the Government and the Bank of England for early warning signs from the economy, found growing worries over the soaring inflation and a marked reduction in confidence among firms. Cost pressures remain extremely elevated, linked to the rising prices for energy and for fuel, as Russia's war in Ukraine further drives up costs on the wholesale market. Unlike households, businesses do not benefit from an energy price cap. The incoming Prime Minister will be dealing with an economy that's facing a heightened risk of recession, said Chris Williamson, the chief economist at S&P Global Market Intelligence, with the British economy facing what he called a deteriorating labour market and persistent elevated price pressures linked to the soaring cost of energy. The monthly Purchasing Managers Index from S&P, the S&P, not the SNP, and the CIPS fell to 49.6 on the index in August. That's down from 52.1 in July. The way the index goes, any reading above 50 would suggest growth in the private sector activity. These figures come as some economists suggested Britain's economy dipped into recession this summer as households tightened their belts amidst the cost of living crisis. The Bank of England has forecast inflation will peak above 13%, the highest level since the early 1980s, and projects a lengthy recession starting in the final quarter of this year. So, of course, this is one of the reasons why a lot of commentators have been saying Liz Truss is certainly not going to call a general election anytime soon, because clearly the economy is slowing down. It might be in recession now, and lots of indicators say it's definitely going to be in recession next year. Well, are we really just repeating what we said in the previous story, that the Scottish Government knows what needs to be done, but it doesn't have the powers to do it?
I would say so, yeah. I would say so. The UK government has been in such a mess. I don't believe that there has been enough attention paid, to the cost of living crisis, and therefore to the recession that appears from all commentators to be just round the corner. I don't believe that they have any real plans to deal with it. I think the Scottish Government probably does have, gosh, I would go as far as to call it a wish list. You know, what they know could be done. They know the situation in Scotland. They know what needs to be done. Detailed plans, but unable to implement because they don't have the levers of power that allow them to do so. And when you look at businesses, Hugh, you mentioned, you know, businesses, the energy issue is major. Small businesses, which are the absolute backbone of the Scottish economy, you know, I'm reading all the time about the energy bills that both retail and the hospitality industry are facing. How can small businesses, which may have been successful up to fairly recently, cope with that level of increase? So, and that leads on to employment issues as well. You know, there may well be employment issues, of course there are, but unemployment issues uh, are around the corner as well when companies start paying people off and indeed closing down. And, you know, back to that old Tory thing about they have never worried about unemployment. They don't care about unemployment. And over the years have made it quite plain that sometimes they think unemployment in certain parts of the UK are worth it to preserve other parts of the UK. And I don't see that they have changed their philosophy in any way in regards to that.
So bad news all round anyway on the
Yeah.
economy, and we'll see, as I said, in a couple of days what the UK government intends to do about it. It's a massive problem. Now, that links us into the next story because, of course, energy is behind quite a lot of the price rises. Now, we learned today that Russia will not resume in full its gas supplies to Europe until the West lifts its sanctions against Moscow. The Kremlin said this as concerns over Russian gas supplies continue to drive up energy prices. Speaking to journalists today, Dmitry Peskov, the Kremlin spokesperson, blamed sanctions introduced against our country by Western countries, including Germany and the UK, he said, for Russia's failure to deliver gas through the Nord Stream 1 pipeline. Other reasons that could cause problems with the pumping don't exist, Mr. Peskov was cited by Interfax news agency as saying. Peskov added that Russia's full resumption of gas supplies via Nord Stream 1 was undoubtedly dependent on whether the West would lift its sanctions on Moscow. It is these sanctions imposed by the Western states that have brought the situation to what we see now. Mr. Peskov's statements today are the clearest indication yet that Russia is trying to force the EU to lift its sanctions imposed against Moscow over its invasion of Ukraine in exchange for Russia restarting its gas deliveries. The leading Russian energy supplier Gazprom announced on Friday evening that a suspension of gas supplies heading westwards through the Nord Stream 1 pipeline would be extended indefinitely, citing malfunctions on the turbine along the pipeline. Gazprom has similarly blamed Western sanctions for disrupting gas deliveries, saying the manufacturer Siemens could not perform repairs on the turbines used on Nord Stream 1 because of sanctions against the Russian state energy company. The EU has rejected Gazprom's claims, accusing Putin of weaponising its gas exports. Now, Linda, I'm not very up to date on what kind of gas turbines you need to use or whether Siemens has the spare parts to fix them or not. Are you cynical about Russia's response here that we like to pump gas but we haven't got the spare parts?
Yeah, of course I am. I mean, I just think it's part of Putin's propaganda war. That's not to say he won't do it. You know, that man's capable of anything as far as I'm concerned. And, you know, it would also have a bad effect on the Russian economy and the Russian people, but I don't think Mr. Putin cares about that. So yes, it is a I don't believe the reasons that they've given, but it's still a potential. And it's, you know, I've been trying to get my head around some of the stuff about gas supply, energy supply, and you know, I read that the UK has a much lower level of import of Russian gas than other countries in mainland Europe. But whatever happens in the European and indeed international energy supply network, it has a knock-on effect on everybody. So of course it would have an effect in the UK as well. And I would hope that both the UK government and the Scottish Government are very, very much looking at how we deal with this situation. I'm sure they must be. Well, I'm sure the Scottish Government must be. I mean, Boris Johnson was rabbiting on about nuclear power in his speech the other day, and kettles and all sorts of nonsense. But that's not a solution that can happen quickly. It's not a solution that I would want to happen anyway, when it comes to nuclear. But it doesn't seem to me that there's any immediacy in what's been said by the UK government at all. So, I keep saying watch the space, but I think that's where we're at because there's no comfort coming. I know it's difficult. Of course, it's difficult because nobody knows what Russia's going to do, and it's an international issue. But there is no degree of comfort at all being given by the UK government that they are looking at this seriously and coming up with potential solutions. I think there might be some very, very hard decisions having to be taken by the Scottish Government as well as the UK Government. But I think everything has to be on the table and everything has to be discussed.
Yep, of course, in the long run, critics of Truss have said we need to start diversifying energy supplies away from gas. But I think when Liz Truss talks about it actually means using more British gas. So that's just going to feed into another climate crisis, isn't it? But we better not discuss that now. We better move on. Now, it would be interesting, we thought, to look at what other governments are doing because, as you say, Linda, it is an international problem. So let's look at the UK's response and compare it with other countries. The COVID pandemic, soaring food and fuel prices, and Russia's invasion of Ukraine have dealt a triple blow to people around the world. Here's a look at what governments are doing elsewhere to try to help their citizens and companies weather the cost of living crisis. Firstly, in the US, the government is going to help millions of indebted former students by cancelling $10,000 of their outstanding student loan. This move follows a $430 billion Inflation Reduction Act, which was announced last month. And this includes cuts to prescription drug prices and tax credits to encourage energy efficiency. Brazil's government has cut fuel taxes and raised social welfare payments. The country's largest oil firm, Petrobras, said last week that they announced a 7% cut in refinery gate gasoline prices in its fourth consecutive such reduction since mid-July. And in July, Chile announced a $1.2 billion aid plan, including labour subsidies and one-time payments of $120 to 7.5 million of its 19 million residents. In Japan, the average minimum wage is set for a record 3.3% increase for a year ending March 2023. Indonesia will reallocate 24 trillion rupee, which is about $1.6 billion of its fuel subsidy budget towards welfare spending, including cash handouts to 20.6 million households. India, 4 months ago, India imposed restrictions on exports of food items, including wheat and sugar, which account for nearly 40% of the Consumer Prices Index, and it will cut taxes on imports of edible oil. Malaysia is expected to spend a record $17 billion in subsidies and cash aid this year to temper the effects of rising prices. And in July, South Africa announced a cut in the pump price of fuels. Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates have raised their social welfare spending. The UAE doubled financial support to low-income Emirati families, while Saudi Arabia's King Salman ordered the allocation of 20 billion rials, and that's about $5.3 billion in dollars. Turkey has increased its minimum wage by about 30%. That's adding to the 50% rise seen at the end of last year. France has frozen gas prices at October 2021 levels and capped electricity price increases to 4%, and at least to the end of this year, and has also handed out €100 to low and middle-income households to help pay their energy bills. The German government is paying all people in regular employment a one-off rebate of €300 in September. Students and welfare recipients have received double their usual payment to assist with heating private homes. Spain will cut the VAT on gas from 21% to 5% from October until the end of the year. In June, the European Union approved an 8.4 billion Spanish and Portuguese plan to reduce wholesale electricity prices in the Iberian market by capping the price of gas used to produce electricity. This will save households 15 to 20% on their energy bills. Poland has announced a one-off payment of 3,000 zlotys, that's about £540 each, for coal-burning households, with smaller subsidies for different types of heating fuel, such as liquid petroleum gas. The Netherlands is offering the lowest earning households a one-off energy subsidy of €1,300, hiking the minimum wage and lowering VAT on energy to 9%. Norway has capped electricity bills at 61p per kilowatt hour, with the state covering 80%, rising to 90% above that. The UK government has yet to announce its plans to deal with the cost of living crisis. Okay, so I'm sure you'll be impressed by that, so I'm not going to ask you to say, do you think that's a good idea? But do you think that gives some useful suggestions to Liz Truss and the incoming Chancellor then, as they pick up their jobs?
I mean, it was interesting, but particularly when you're talking out with Europe, folks start from a different level. So it's, I wouldn't, without knowing the whole picture, have an opinion on the things that have been done. And it's interesting what's been getting done in Europe. I mean, I've been interested about, the countries which have decided to be quite hard on the energy companies. I, I think that's something that hasn't been considered here. When you look at the profits the energy companies have been making here, my concern is that Liz Truss will try and preserve those. As far as welfare is concerned, that's been getting hammered, reduced by the Tories since Ian Duncan Smith came in with his welfare reform. All the great talk about it, the fairness and everything else, no. What it's done is made an awful lot of people worse off. I'm also really interested in the minimum wage stuff. Now, that's one of the issues in this conglomeration of nations that is the UK, is that when you actually look at it, the only good and well-kent trade unions that are around now are largely in the public sector or former public sector, etc. The Tories, and I have to say that they were not particularly stopped by Labour with some of the trade union reforms. The private sector is really badly represented now, and the minimum wage is not good. I mean, there's too many people not getting the real living wage, even though they get the minimum wage. There's still the variations for age in the minimum wage. That is something that could be seriously looked at to help people. However, the state that some companies are in now, with the worry about the energy costs and everything, you can't just do one of these things and expect it to make things better. There's plenty of companies out there that could afford to be paying their staff an awful lot better. Of course there are. The ones that are making huge profits all the time. But when you look at the small and medium-sized businesses, there has to be a package of measures which is in some way supporting the employees and also making sure that businesses don't go out of business. So it's fine to look at other nations and what they're doing, but the starting point's often very, very different. But the big things, like looking at VAT, like looking at freezing energy costs, like looking at proper caps on rises, these are things that can be done by any government. And
Yes,
I
decisive
certainly
action is
feel
being
that Liz
taken.
Truss
So
would.
either to freeze
Mhm.
energy or to in fact boost the spending of ordinary
Yeah.
populations. And of course, the ordinary people in the population, of course, spending is the thing that drives the economy. So those measures are
Hmm.
being taken by other countries. So it certainly
Yeah.
can't be argued that it's not feasible to do it here. Okay, so that actually
Mm.
leads to our next question. Next story we're going to look at is trade union rights in the UK, because you talked about trade unions and minimum wage,
Mm.
Linda. So the
Yeah.
Trade Union Congress of the UK, that's the TUC, has reported the UK government to the United Nations ILO, that's the International Labour Organization, for alleged attacks
Hmm.
on workers' right to strike. The TUC said today that the UK government ministers had taken several steps to infringe the right to strike, including a new law which allows companies to use agency workers to break strikes, and a proposal for a minimum service level on transport and other critical sectors. The submission to the ILO follows a campaign statement from Liz Truss, who, of course, is going to be appointed Prime Minister at Balmoral tomorrow, following her victory in the Conservative contest today. During the campaign, she pledged to crack down on unions within the first 30 days of office. Francis Grady, TUC General Secretary, said the government was seeking to limit workers' ability to bargain for better wages just when inflationary pressures are reaching their peak. The right to strike is a fundamental freedom, she said, but the Conservative government is attacking it at every opportunity. Threatening this right tilts a balance of power too far towards employers and breaches the legal obligations ministers signed up to in government. Relations between the trade unions and the government have almost completely broken down in recent months, as low unemployment and rapidly rising prices have prompted an increased number of industrial disputes that has spilled over into a wave of strike action for higher pay and better conditions across sectors ranging from rail and port workers to Royal Mail employees and even to barristers. The TUC, in the report to the ILO, detailed a series of law changes and proposals that it said would make it harder to strike. Those changes would impinge on the rights of freedom of association and collective bargaining that should be guaranteed by ILO conventions, which have been ratified by the UK, the trade union body argued. If it decides the complaint is valid, the ILO has the power to censure the UK as a signatory to its conventions in reports. That could be embarrassing for the UK government, which regularly comments on rights in other countries. However, the ILO does not have the power to intervene directly in UK government legislation. The UK government has already introduced some laws this year that aim to limit the influence of unions. In July, Westminster voted through a law to allow companies to employ agency workers to replace striking workers, despite objections of the Recruitment and Employment Federation, which is a lobby group for businesses in that sector. Is this part of the drift to the right, which we talked about earlier on, Linda, looking at the problems we've mentioned above? Does it look like the Truss government might just say the whole problem, the thing behind inflation is trade unions putting in unreasonable wage demands? Do you think she could scapegoat the trade unions in this with this kind of tactic?
Absolutely, it's we've been here before. You know, Tories have always done these things. Margaret Thatcher, of course, did it big style. And Liz Truss makes no bones about the fact that she's a huge admirer of the deceased Mrs. Thatcher. In fact, I think she channels her regularly. I think it's really quite weird. But so yeah, you said I think you were quoting from the TUC that the ILO, if they try to put on some sanctions about the UN Convention about the rights of workers, it would embarrass the UK government. That bunch are not capable of being embarrassed. You just have to look at the pantomime that's been going the last few years. There's no embarrassment for them. They just breenge their way through to get their own way in everything. And yes, they probably will bring in more anti-trade union legislation. Yes, it's a big jump to the right, even more, but that's not a surprise because that's the trajectory that we're on in the UK. That's one of the many reasons that I want Scotland to be independent is because I don't want my nation to be part of that. When you look at everything they're doing, they've been sanctioned, to use the phrase before. They've been told they're acting illegally. They don't give a toss about any of it. And I just want out of that. I want to be forging a different path for my own country and for the people within my own country. And I think, some folk just seem to be sleepwalking into it because they believe the rhetoric and the propaganda that's been put out there about trade unions are the problem. I think there's been a couple of instances with trade unions lately, in particular people representing trade unions that have come across so well in the press and media that folk are getting their eyes opened a wee bit. I would love to see more of that because the Tories will just keep creating chaos government, because I think that's a tactic. Chaos government so that they can sneak things through. It's what Boris Johnson is an absolute master at. I don't think Liz Truss will be a master at that, but I think there are those around her that will help her on that path so that it keeps going. And they have every intention of hammering the unions. Um, I'm not so sure they'll want to hammer the professional associations that many of them are members of, which act as trade unions. You know, whether you're talking about the BMA and all these people, yes, they're necessary. I don't have a problem with them, but they're trade unions too. The professions have their professional associations which behave as trade unions. I don't see any of them hammering them. It's your ordinary, down to earth worker that creates the profits for the Tories and their pals that are the ones they're trying to get.
Yeah, so there might well be other moves against trade unions. When you talk about professionals, of course, but remember in the story we read out that barristers are actually on strike in England as well. So they haven't previously
Yeah.
been regarded as a hotbed of militancy. We'll have to quickly move on now because looking at the clock. Now, Linda, you said a minute ago that the UK government wouldn't be embarrassed by a complaint to the ILO, so they're also maybe not going to be embarrassed by criticism of the Rwanda policy. The UK government's plan to
Yeah.
deport people seeking asylum to Rwanda has been challenged in the High Court, with claims that ministers deliberately ignored evidence that that East African country had violated human rights, including the right to live free from torture. The legal challenge comes as the number of refugees arriving by small boats across the Channel rose to record levels. The Prime Minister-elect Liz Truss has both pledged to stick has pledged to stick with the policy. Raza Hussein QC, appearing on behalf of asylum seekers along with the Public and Commercial Services Union, that's the PCS, and the groups Care for Calais and Detention Action, on Monday said that the policy was unlawful under the Human Rights Act and the common law. The court was told asylum seekers removed to Rwanda face a significant risk of violation of their rights to be free from torture and inhuman treatment. In written submissions, the claimants said that Home Secretary Priti Patel and the government, including the Foreign Office and Number 10, were themselves aware of and appear to have had serious concerns over Rwanda's present and historic human rights record. Mr. Hussein told the court Rwanda is a one party authoritarian state that does not tolerate political opposition. It's a regime that repeatedly imprisons, tortures, and murders those who it thinks are his political opponents. In April, Home Secretary Patel signed what she described as a world first agreement with Rwanda in an attempt to deter people from crossing the Channel. Nonetheless, the first deportation flight, which is due to take off on June 14th, was grounded after a series of legal challenges. The court is expected to hear that Rwanda's policy accelerated screening processes. Rwanda's the Rwanda policy's accelerated screening processes do not allow a Home Secretary to identify vulnerabilities or to secure sufficient information on the risks faced by asylum seekers who are threatened with relocation. It will also be claimed that the assessment system for UK arrivals has been set up specifically to ensure that most fail, despite legitimate claims under human rights law. Lord Justice Lewis, sitting with Mr. Justice Swift, previously said the hearing in London would start on Monday and last for 5 days, with the second hearing in the claim brought by the group Asylum Aid, which will take place in October. Both decisions are expected to be given in writing at the same time. So, Linda, this is a story which, of course, has been going on for some time, but the point is it now reaches court level. So obviously, we can't comment on what's going to happen until 5 days' time. But I was talking about embarrassment earlier on. So, would you continue what you said in the previous
No.
story? Should be an
Yeah, I mean,
embarrassment to the UK government, but you think they're not too bothered about it?
I don't care. I mean, and just a point that I think, should be made, Hugh, is the UK successive governments, their asylum policies have always been set up to ensure that most folk fail. And when you look at the number of, over the years, successful appeals there have been, with people who have initially failed and who have perhaps been put in detention. And there's a detention centre just up the road from me in Lanarkshire, at Dungavel. So the system has always been to ensure that most folk fail. It's got worse under the Tories, and it then got worse under Priti Patel. Patel, who, started this Rwanda thing. So I'm glad it's in court, and I suspect that the court will find that it is unlawful. However, I don't think the UK government will be embarrassed by that, and I don't think it'll make a blind bit of difference. They'll carry on with it. Now, I don't know what's going to happen to Priti Patel. I was listening today to various commentators, and the word is that she's out the door. And what I did hear a few saying was that Suella Braverman has been earmarked for the Home Office job. So I don't think things are going to get much better there. So I think they would just try and carry on with it. So it'll be down to the people in charities, the lawyers and barristers who feel so strongly about asylum policy in this country. It'll be down to them to be carrying on and hammering away with the individual cases. And thankfully, these people are there to keep on doing that. Because, as I said, most asylum seekers, over the years, that have ended up in Dungavel and other detention centres have ended up, getting successful appeals and things like that. So if you're sitting in Rwanda, it doesn't matter a hoot whether you have a successful appeal or not. They're just trying to wash their hands of any responsibility whatsoever for international obligations that the UK signed up to. So yes, I think that it may well be it's found unlawful. No, I don't think the UK government will be embarrassed, and no, I don't think they'll change the policy on this.
Yeah, of course, the government does have the possibility of legislating, so if something is unlawful, that could be changed. So let's quickly move on now. I know, looking at the clock, we better get a move on, Linda. So the next story, we'll return to the sad news which was reported earlier this year of the killing of a journalist, an Al Jazeera journalist, by an Israeli soldier. So the latest we hear, the Israeli army has said there is a high possibility that a soldier killed the Al Jazeera journalist in May, but the shooting was accidental, and so no one is to be punished. Shireen Abu Akleh was shot dead while covering Israeli military raids in the occupied West Bank. Palestinians blamed the killing on Israel, which initially suggested she may have been hit by militant fire, but later said a soldier may have hit her by mistake during an exchange of fire. Shireen Abu Akleh, a Palestinian-American journalist, had covered the West Bank for the satellite channel for 2 decades and was known across the Arab world, announcing the results of an investigation into her killing. A senior Israeli military official said the military could not conclusively determine where the fire emanated from, suggesting that there may have been Palestinian gunmen in the same area as the Israeli soldier, but he said the soldier shot the journalist with a very high likelihood and did so by mistake. The official did not explain why witness accounts and videos showing limited militant activity in the area, as well as no gunfire in the vicinity until a barrage, which struck Ms. Abu Akleh and injured another reporter. At the briefing, an Israeli official said that the soldier had misidentified Shireen Abu Akleh despite the journalist wearing a blue bulletproof vest, which was clearly marked with press. Ms. Abu Akleh's family criticised this investigation, saying the army tried to obscure the truth and avoid responsibility for the killing. They said in a statement, "Our family is not surprised by this outcome, since it's obvious to anyone that Israeli war criminals cannot investigate their own crimes. However, we remain deeply hurt, frustrated and disappointed." The family also reiterated their call for an independent US investigation and an inquiry by the International Criminal Court. So, very sad story, but surely this underlines, doesn't it, Linda, how much we all depend on good journalism, both here in Broadcasting Scotland and other media channels. We have to depend on the ability of journalists to go into difficult areas and sometimes put themselves in danger, but we need them to do that, don't we? And unfortunately, there's been a lot of deaths in journalism mentioned there and in other theatres this year, haven't there?
Yeah, well, yeah, and it's getting worse. I mean, right across the world, we hear stories not just of journalists being killed, but of journalists being incarcerated as well. There's a, real clampdown on good information. getting out from places, generally places where there's either proven or very suspected human rights abuses. So you get journalists barred from going to places, you get journalists locked up so that they can't report. It happens all over the place. I hope there is an independent investigation into this particular killing. I, I think there's more to come out. I'm quite fascinated that Israel has potentially admitted that it was a military bullet that killed this lass. Why would they admit that? And I'm just thinking, why have they admitted that? There's something there that has yet to come out. So I would like to see an independent investigation.
Right, so that's on the sad killing of that Al Jazeera journalist earlier, probably by an Israeli soldier, although there's probably not going to be any further action. So I'm going to finish up with a health story, Linda, which certainly affects me, maybe you too. Elderly care home residents, I'm not one of them, but I have received my flu jab invitation and my fourth COVID vaccine. I think that's 4, so I'll be doing that in about 4 weeks' time. But elderly care home residents are among the first to receive their COVID-19 and flu vaccines as the winter vaccine programme gets underway. More than 2 million people in Scotland will be offered vaccines over the next 3 months, helping to protect the public and to relieve pressure on the NHS. Invitations have been sent out to all over 65s, and the rest of you will get them by the end of the week. And more than 41,000 frontline health and social care workers have booked appointments through the portal since it opened last month, continuing efforts to keep Scotland as the UK's leading nation in vaccine uptake. Both new bivalent vaccines, which target Omicron and the original variant of COVID-19, will be deployed alongside existing vaccines, though the vaccination individuals actually receive depends on age and availability. Both the current and new bivalent vaccines provide good protection from severe illness or hospitalisation from the known COVID-19 variants. The COVID-19 vaccine will be given at the same time as a flu jab where possible. Health Secretary Humza Yousaf visited the Victoria Manor Care Home in Edinburgh, where residents Agnes Taylor and Andrew Young were among those to be vaccinated first. And Mr Yousaf said, "This country is indebted to those dedicated frontline workers who work tirelessly to get the majority of Scots immunised all the year round, and whose efforts have led to a sharp reduction in hospitalisation in recent months." Okay, so we, of course, urge everyone to take the opportunity to get vaccinated. So I'll certainly be going along to the Glasgow Central Mosque in a couple of weeks to get mine, right? Have you got your letter yet, Linda?
I don't have my letter yet. I'm expecting it though. I should get it this week from what you just said, because I'm not an elderly care home resident yet. Thank you very much, Hugh. So yes, I'm
Okay.
looking forward. Both arms, flu in one, COVID-19 in the other. So
That's
yeah,
what I did last
and
time. No
I
problems.
would
I'm
urge
glad to report.
everyone to go along.
Right, well, thanks for joining us, Linda, tonight. So we're not quite finished yet, though, so I'm sorry we started a couple of minutes late, but that was my fault. So let me just finish up with 2 points. First of all, as I'm sure I've asked you before, I wonder if you can give us a hand, ladies and gentlemen. So thanks for watching tonight. And before I go, I just want to remind you that at Broadcasting Scotland, we depend on the generosity of our supporters. So to everyone who has donated and everyone who signed up to make a regular monthly payment, thank you very much. Our programmes are always going to be free to view. However, if you can afford £5 a month, please consider becoming one of our Broadcasting Scotland supporters. You can do so if you just look at the website, and the link is on the screen below you on broadcastingscotland.scot, and then look at the donate button. We have set ourselves a target of adding 10,000 new subscribers to enable us to employ staff and make more programmes. As soon as we get there, the more money we get in, the more programmes we'll make. That's how it goes. So that's almost it tonight. So thanks for watching. Well, just before we go, we've got a special for you, because as I said earlier on, right now, as I speak, we are reaching, Linda, the very end of the Johnson years. And so, in fact, there's just a few more hours of that era, that historical era to go. So we're going to mark it now with a contribution from the singer Richard Lewis. So this is his Boris Johnson Blues. So thanks for watching tonight, and Andrew will be here for Scotland at 7 tomorrow. So from me and from Linda, good night. Thanks for watching. Bye.
Now, ladies and gentlemen, it may come as a surprise to you, it certainly did to me, to know that our soon-to-be former Prime Minister was indeed working on a biography of William Shakespeare, when the pesky day job apparently got in the way of its completion. Absolutely. So the good news is, of course, after the 5th of September, there's a great likelihood of it actually being published. This is absolutely true. You can Google it, ladies and gentlemen. Shakespeare, The Riddle of Genius was the name of the work. And I'm certainly not about to make fun of our present Prime Minister's political difficulties. However, I did think it was an opportunity to explore musically what it must be like for one great literary genius to be exploring and writing a biography of another. Well, I woke up this morning, found myself out of a job. There was a knife sticking out the back of my neck. Must have been Sajid's mob. There was no sign of it at breakfast. No, not a hint of it at lunch. But by mid-afternoon, they're all over me, I tell you. This time it was Gove's bunch. Sure, I lied about that Brexit money. Really fibbed about them Turks. But I made damn sure them Scots didn't get a vote. See, that's the way my democracy works. Well, I swear I never saw it coming. No, not so much as a sign. 'Cause I've been getting away with it all of my life, so tell me, just where'd I go wrong this time? I got the Boris Johnson blues, yeah. Hell yeah, I got those big old Boris Johnson blues, so I do. 'Cause yesterday I was somebody, and I won't be one of history's losers. Still, I see, I got my big commissions. Pick up my $1 million fee when I write me that book on Billy Shakespeare. So like a brother to me, two geniuses together, catch them both on the same page. See, I got a million roles I can play. For me, the whole world's a stage. I got the Boris Johnson blues, yeah. Hell yeah, I got the big old Boris Johnson blues, so I do. 'Cause yesterday I was somebody, and I won't be one of history's losers. Take it away, Jacob. That's my little Rees-Mogg. Damn, he's loyal. That's right, bring it down, Jacob. That's right, right down now. I went down to the nursery. I started counting my kids. Had to stop at number 27, though, because Carrie came in flashing those big eyelids. I said, fancy another trip to heaven, baby. She said, you're not PM anymore, so pack your things and leave quietly now, 'cause Liz is at the front door. I got those Boris Johnson blues, yeah. Hell yeah, I got those big old Boris Johnson blues, so I do. Hell yeah, 'cause yesterday I was somebody, and I won't, no I won't, no I won't, no I won't. Yes, I will be one of history's losers. Hell yeah! That's right, thank you. That's right, get it down now. That's right, get up here, Jacob. Get up here now, get up here, get up here, get! Thank you. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Shakespeare, The Riddle of Genius, out next year by Boris Johnson and available from all disreputable booksellers.